Have you heard of a term called inner source? I'm damn sure that most of my viewers have already heard of it. But if you have not heard of it, then that's going to be the topic of today's discussion. I mean, we are going to discuss a lot of things, but inner source is going to be the core topic. My next guest is Harish Pillay from Red Hat, and we are going to talk about inner source and also how Red Hat engages organizations to help them understand how open source works and also kind of help them get involved with open source developments. We'll also talk about machine learning, a topic both Harish and I are passionate about. And we'll also talk about mystery meat. What is mystery meat? Well, let's take you to Harish so we can talk about all those things.
Right. My name is Harish Pillay. I'm based in Singapore and I am with Red Hat. This is my 15th year in Red Hat, started my 15th year actually. I'm looking at areas of three big areas. One is around open source community engagements from an Asia Pacific perspective. A second one is around engagements with CXOs in Asia Pacific. One of the bigger challenges we have here is to understand how CIOs and CXOs for that matter, how they can use open source for their usage, for their technology, for their environment, for their organization to the best way that they can, and to make the best out of it. And the bottom line in a lot of these cases is they don't fully appreciate how this works for them. They hear stories, success stories in many cases, but they don't fully appreciate it as well. So helping them to understand, and a lot of times I've been have opportunities to talk to CXOs because they know what they know what they want to do, but they don't quite fully appreciate why is it that there is this open source project, and why is Red Hat doing an open source product out of the project, and how does Red Hat then give accountability to their organization as a customer, and what is the magic that happens in between. So telling the story is very important, and so once people get it, then it's a lot easier to go to the next step, which is what is your pain point and how can we help you. So that's the CXOs. And the third area is around government public policy in terms of technology adoption on one end, and the other one is all about standards and how you can make sure that you don't get yourself locked into standards that you cannot do anything with, especially from a public embracement of technology perspective. And a few examples I'll give in that area is things like IoT, things like smart city, smart nation, because you don't want your smart solution for your country or your city to be locked into a non-standard environment. First issue, it has to be standards based so that you can have multiple people, multiple solutions providers providing the solutions that you need. The second thing there is you have to know what the heck the software is trying to do. You need to know, therefore, what are the data structures, how is the software written, what is the considerations around the software, can I manage it, maintain it. If I cannot do that as a city or as a country, then you are then basically locked into a particular vendor, and you are at that point beholden to the vendor for whatever it is for the future. So if you're going to build a smart city, you cannot afford to do that. And so that's a realization that some of the countries around in Asia Pacific is getting to, but we need to get more of them to fully appreciate that so that they can do the right thing. So these are three big wide areas.
And out of the three areas, which one is like kind of core focus of either Red Hat or for you?
Let me start with from a Red Hat point of view. Red Hat is looking at in fact all three areas. The community part of the story is because there's a lot of open source projects out there that we take as upstream and turn them into products. So open source projects to a product transition, then we make it available for our customers. So that's been our core aspect of what Red Hat has been doing all these years. The other two areas, these are, again, it varies from city to city, country to country. The focus on government engagements, there is a lot more things happening today because there's a lot of ideas around, especially with Smart Nation type of initiatives. GST, like in Red Hat, in India, for example, they added a new GST program. So that's one big area of engagement because you needed high throughput of the transactions and so on. Then in countries like, for example, from where I come from in Singapore, they wanted to do a smart nation project. So they wanted to make sure that they have the ability to provide government agencies to create applications that can quickly be deployed. So in that particular instance, they used OpenShift as the platform across all of government, so that they can write applications. Different agencies can do that and then deploy and decommission and recommission new ones, and so very quick turnaround. So that's the kind of thing that is happening from that perspective. So it is maturing in across the board in many areas. So there's no one single focus area, but it's across the area. That's from a Red Hat point of view. So where do I fit into that equation is pushing that agenda forward. But there's a lot of other things that we need to bring into play. One of the things that it's getting a little bit more traction these days, the whole idea of inner source. Inner source is using all the open source models of collaboration that you see that has brought us where we are today, to bring those ideas into an organization, so that within the firewall of the organization, you use and deploy these these open source ideas in the inner source model. And this is a phrase that was coined by Tim O'Reilly back in the year 2000 at a conference, where he mentioned the idea of inner source in context of how open source was changing how the world was deploying and using technology in the .com area space. But today, we can actually make that happen for companies, because there were a lot more technologies that needed to mature to make it happen for corporates. So things like version control, Git as an example, collaboration internally to do whatever it is that you need to do internally from a communication perspective between different teams and so on. So there are a bunch of things that needed to come into play for inner source to happen successfully. So today that is happening. The nice thing that I see happening is that organizations are reaching out to us at Red Hat, says, Red Hat, can you help us do open source internally correctly? So we don't call it open source from that point of view. We just call it at that point is an inner source model. So we have had banks, we had telcos, we have had governments reaching out to us, and increasingly it's becoming a very interesting opportunity to talk to them, explain to them what's going on, and then to see how we can make it happen for them. So that's really where I'm focusing on for the last year and a half. Yeah.
You said that you're also working with the government agencies, especially in some areas, and I can also see that there could be some kind of connection between inner source versus as well as when you want to ensure that governments are not logged into a particular vendor.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any connection between these two?
There is definitely a connection. It's a continuum. So inner source is really applying open source methodologies and technologies inside a firewall with no exposure to the outside. The idea being, how do I get my different silos of product development teams within a bank, for example? You may have different teams doing whatever applications they're developing. One team may have solved a particular problem that may be an issue for another team, but because the way these organizations have been doing all this while, siloed, I don't talk to you, you don't talk to me, I don't look at your code, you don't look at my code, but we are part of the same bigger organization. Why don't you do this? So inner source becomes the starting point where you can now say, okay, you have access to all the repositories, whichever team you are, you're still responsible for your project, but you get to see everybody else's stuff, whatever they are doing. And if they've already solved, let's say, a UX problem, why do you need to solve it again if that's an issue for you? Why don't you use the skills or the people who have done and fixed the problem, get it to be the inputs for you to work on what you need to do. So to make that happen from an inner source point of view. Now, at some point, some of those things may be flipped to become an open source project. So that's where at a government level, for example, they can now focus on building solutions with the citizens to solve problems that is applicable across the board. So there may be certain solutions that needs to be done within the government, whatever requirements between agencies, but there will definitely be the aspect with the citizens, because that's at the end of the day, governments exist also to serve the citizens. So how do you serve the citizens? And if there are skills in the citizens, in the people whom you're engaging with, let them build the applications, give them the data. So if there's a data policy, an open data policy that a government has, and increasingly a lot of the governments have, which is a great thing to see happen. So now you are empowering the citizenry to create solutions for themselves. Now, it would be great if you can also host it in the government infrastructure. because at least the citizen doesn't have to worry about creating their own infrastructure to solve a common problem for everybody. It can be solved through a government a common infrastructure. So OpenShift, as an example, is one of those things that could provide that as the platform. So that's basically how some of these things are flowing in and out of different realms of usage.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about inner source, or should we move to the next topic?
Well, inner source, well, there's a lot of other things around inner source. It's still a growing space in terms of participation. There are a lot more people who are now beginning to see the light. And there are organizations like GitHub and Google and PayPal who are getting into the space, trying to get organizations to understand and also to have success stories of companies who have actually done so, and for them to come and talk about it. In fact, there is going to be a inner source conference. I forget exactly when, but sometime this year. I think it's in later part of September or October. And I think that will be a good time for people who want to explore what is it about inner source that they can learn and use internally. And certainly they can always reach out to Red Hat for help in terms of if they want to do something, we're there to help them achieve the goals of inner source if they can.
I don't know if we've talked about it, but is there any kind of correlation between inner source and outer open source? But like once you change the culture within the organization, it helps them in also.
Yeah. See, there are a few things around inner source that needs to be addressed. One is when you bring the ideas of open source into a company, for example, and we call it now inner source, there are a few things that happen. Firstly, there are people who have been doing stuff in a particular way. They have been developers in the bank, in wherever they may be for the last 5 years, 10 years. They know how they do stuff. They may be challenged to use these new techniques and new technologies. You need to train them up. You don't want to lose them, so that they can then become your champions as well when they are trained. So training those people up, it becomes an important consideration. We don't do that in open source side of the house. Because open source side, if you are interested, you go figure it out, train yourself up and join us. Whereas in a company, because these individuals are there as an employee or as an associate of the organization, you don't want to upset them. You want to win them over. So how do I win them over? So you do that by offering training, train them up. How do I use Git as an example? If they never use Git, how do you use Git? What are the pluses and minuses? Because in their frame of reference, they know that particular model, which is their whatever SVN tools that they're using, right? Versioning tools. Now asking them to move to Git, they may be uncomfortable. You don't want to, push them away. Now, you will also have another advantage that you gain by going down this path by training is also new people coming on board. How do I hire new guys to join us? Join a bank, for example. If I say, there's a bank hiring that's going on and you are a fresh graduate from a university and all you have done is open source collaboration using Git tools and stuff like that. And you will have a cultural shock to bring these people into a bank, for example, who may be using much older technologies. And then for the banks to say, that's how we do stuff. That's how we are familiar with, your newer stuff. We are not doing that. We're not familiar with that. And we didn't want to rock the boat. If you choose that path, that's going to be very, very hard. That's not going to be successful in the long term. You're not going to bring in new people, new ideas. So you need to adapt this internally. And so that's the challenge. Once you do this, then people are familiar with it. I know how to do a Git commit. I know how to do a push. I know how to send a pull request. And once I do that, it's easy for me to say, okay, are there other open source projects I can be participating in as an individual? Or as an organization, you may say, you know what, we have created this internal tool for our purposes, but because it's following the same norms across the board, it's easy for me to flip this over and switch it to a public project. For example, you can put it under a foundation, like if it is something about cloud related stuff, maybe CNCF or whatever it is that makes sense, put it there. And now you can participate in the same way you do it internally. So the tools become the unifying factor across the board. And where you contribute, that's depending on what you want to do. So I think that's really where the transition would happen.
In our previous conversation, you talked about machine learning as one of the areas that you are, personally or from Red Hat side interested in. But whenever I talk to Red Hat or SUSE and these companies know their strength, so they are kind of still, sticking to your strength. But if you look at the fourth industrial revolution, that's all about, So, can you talk about where are we from the Linux community? When I say community, I mean the enterprise world heading in that direction.
I think that's the next phase for industrial revolution. But I think from a Red Hat point of view, there are internal services that we provide to our customers that uses a lot of machine learning already today. We don't really go around talking about it from that perspective because it just does the job. But more importantly, we want to enable our customers to do the kind of AI related stuff, workflows that they want to achieve. AI, again, a big umbrella thing, so specifically talking about machine learning. So there are some tools that we have internally that we have been building and using ourselves. But more importantly is to work in an open source community to see what are the other tools that bring into the play. TensorFlow as an example, right? So if you want to do analysis of stuff and you want to also be able to do deep neural network related stuff in that as well. The intention at the end of the day is what is the best way that we can help a customer, because a lot of what Red Hat does, we go by what the customer wants. We are not going to create something out of the blue sitting in our own space and say, oh, this is what we like to build and therefore, Mr. Customer, please use it. No, what we do is driven and derived from what the customer wants. So in that process, we will of course be looking at open source tools that make sense for the customer to use, plus something that has to be built. What is there something new that we need to build? So in that case, we may have to start some new projects or whatever it is that answers that particular requirement, which at the end of the day will also become an open source project because that's what Red Hat does. That's how we do things. So machine learning is the next big thing that we need to address. Many things in there. We don't have any products right now. There's no products to sell to a customer. But we will. This is an area that we are actively looking at doing stuff in as well. Because a lot of the tools that you need to do from an AI point of view, because a lot of the problems you have is with big data, velocity of data, and timeliness as well, and also the veracity of the data that's coming through. So the tools like in the JBoss suite of products that we have allow like data virtualization and so on. So that helps making sure that you have the ability, the closeness of the data to where the computation needs to happen, especially in IoT space, and then to do the analysis close to the edge so that you can then don't have to go back and forth before you get the answer back. So to do that kind of stuff. So there are some areas, some things that we are doing. Again, a lot of it is new. It's new in the sense that these are new deployment scenarios, not so much that the technology itself is brand new. These new deployment technologies and new use case scenarios, primarily driven by the IoT space, because that's where a lot of the interest seems to be. So again, we don't have a singular focus only in one area, but this is the growth area, so we need to make sure that open source succeeds there. And when it succeeds, we succeed along with the open source community succeeding everybody else in the ecosystem. So that's really where what I want to say about that.
One thing that it came to my mind was as we are moving from the traditional workloads towards containerized and microservices. Do you think the overall architecture of the Linux based operating systems will also change? Like Red Hat already has atomic host. You also have RHEL. SUSE is working on CASP and Cubic. Canonical have their own Snappy core, and then you of course have Docker have their own engine, and then the CoreOS have the container release. So do you think that as the whole landscape is changing, the whole structure of OS will also change and evolve?
That's a good, interesting speculation, I must say. I think at the end of the day, what you run to provide a service to your application, because that's what an operating system does, you need to know whether this is stable enough, is secure enough, there's accountability at the end of it. Now, I can certainly pull in the latest kernel and put it on my system and then run it. Now, if something breaks, I keep all the broken parts. But if I have a system which has got accountability built in by means of a vendor, for example, using Red Hat as an example, that then stands behind that particular version of whatever kernel it is. Now, whether it is in a ref environment, whether it is in a Kubernetes type of scenario, or it's an OpenShift, or wherever it may be sitting, the accountability at that layer has to be known. It cannot be something that I don't know what is in my underlying layers, and I'm just taking a risk. Now, if I'm going to run my enterprise on that, that's going to be a huge risk that I'm going to take, because if something fails, we really don't want finger pointing. We want to be able to know what went wrong and how do I fix it. And that's really the story that a lot of people are somehow unfortunately missing when we deal with multiple types of operating systems at the base level. Because if your foundation is not strong, it's just like any building. If your foundation is not strong, you got no accountability for the foundation. Whatever you build on top of it, expect failure to happen. And when failure happens, how do I know? How do I fix it? So that's, I've always felt that when I look at buildings that are being built, if the building is not built on a solid foundation, and if there's no professional engineer that signs off on a civil engineer that signs off on this is a secure foundation, you can build your 50-story building, I would be doubtful. So in the same way, when you have software architectures out there that the layers, we can extract out a layer, yeah, you can abstract it out, but you need accountability as well. There was this phrase called the mystery meat in a particular sandwich. So I like to use this as an example, which is you go to a store. Let's say you go to a store when there is a sandwich that sits in the behind the counter, and you order the sandwich and you're happy with it and you consume that, for example. Now let's say that very same sandwich 30 seconds ago was taken out from the shelf and put on a table in the restaurant. The same thing, nothing changed in the between. You go there and the person at the counter says, oh, this is the same sandwich that was from here moved to the table 30 seconds ago. Would you be willing to take that as opposed to one that is behind the counter? Immediately, the trust factor of that sandwich that's placed outside is reduced. I don't know what is inside. What could have gone wrong? Just 30 seconds. You could have seen it in your own eyes, it being moved from one place to another. But your immediate reaction to it is, I don't think I want to trust that one. I'd rather have it behind the counter. So the same way, how do I know that when you package together stuff in a container, for example, that the different layers are actually what it claims to be? How would I know? I need to know that. Why do I need to do that? If it is experimental, I don't really care. If you're trying new things, please go ahead and knock yourself out. But if I'm going to run it in production, I need to know. And so that, to me, is where the change is. It has to happen. I think it's happening there already. So I think that's the interesting story that I think I want to share, because you need to know at every layer what is it that I'm running. It's very nice and sexy to think about, I can run any container. Yes, I know. I love that idea. It's a fabulous idea. But I also need to know, if I'm going to run in production, what am I running? What are my different mystery meats that are inside my sandwich? Well, some of the projects that we have to help that mystery meat issue, right, with signatures of the various layers, also things with secure containers and privileged containers, so that you know what you're dealing with. So I think those are some of the areas where as Red Hat, and maybe not just Red Hat alone, it's also the bigger picture. Who else? All organizations that need to run containerized workloads have to be recognizing and considering all these issues. We cannot pass the buck to somebody else. Organizations need to know what it is that they're running, so the tools have to help them. And that's where a lot of the work that Red Hat is also doing with Kubernetes, with Cryo, for example, and other means to create containers. It's all the workspace is in that area, and I think that is going to drive a lot of the enterprise level deployments. I would love to see all the other open source OS providers as well to have that kind of stepping up to the plate to do that kind of additional work. And we, the stuff we do is all open source anyway, so they can see what is being done and adapt it and make it better.
Thanks for watching, and thanks to all of my Patreon who are supporting my work on Patreon. If you're not on Patreon yet, please consider supporting my work there. It's not much, but it will help me in writing all these stories and creating all these awesome videos and podcasts for you guys. So thanks for watching. See you again next time. Bye for now.